Mary is a witch trial victim from the delightful BBC show Ghosts. Over the past couple of months, I've machine sewn her outfit from the series. I'm quite a lot younger than Katie Wicks, the very talented actor who plays Mary on the show, so this outfit is for, as it were, Mary at my age. It's very possible, if not probable, that Mary's clothes when she was my age would have been mostly the same items as she wore for the rest of her life, as peasants in the Stuart era would not have been able to afford many different sets of clothing or have had the time to sew lots of clothes even if they had been able to afford the cloth. Most of Mary's clothes have likely been handed down to her, mended, altered, worn to bits, and generally just used over and over. Everything is made for practicality, but this is not to say that the occasional indulgence into looking nice was out of the question. Every woman, rich or poor, had the same base garment, known as a shift or chemise. From what I can tell, the word chemise is more often used for finely tailored upper-class garments, whereas a working woman's item would be a shift, but this is only a very broad rule, and both words are used for both sorts of people. The shift is made of a comfortable, absorbent cloth, usually linen. Mary's is made of undyed linen, with ties at the back of the neck and a drawstring at the waist. Most women would have had several shifts, and they were washed regularly, which allowed the rest of the outfit to go relatively long periods of time without being washed. The shift was designed to absorb sweat and dirt and was also worn to sleep. Stockings, usually wool, were worn to protect the feet, which was essential for lower class people who would spend their days standing up, pulling potatoes out of fields. However, elastic was yet to be invented, and so the stockings were tied on, above or below the knee, by lengths of cloth or ribbon known as garters, and the top of the stocking was then folded over. Both stockings and garters could be very, very fancy if one had the money to pay for them, but could also be very simply made. I'm wearing my stockings inside out because I have issues with big seams directly on my skin. Rather surprisingly, if you don't know much about historical clothing that is, this is the point at which shoes are put on, but it's just easier. This is the point at which you can move most easily, so why not take the opportunity to put your shoes on? Mary's shoes are made of leather, although actually I used a leather substitute. I had to hand sew these for thickness of cloth reasons. They're very simple for ease of making, and they lace up. If Mary were at a later stage in her life than I am in mine, she would at this point put on her stays. The stays was the precursor to the corset and to the bra, and was, contrary to popular belief, pretty comfortable from what I've read. As much as anything is comfortable, of course. It would have been no worse than a bra if worn properly. And if you think about it, this makes sense. A working class woman like Mary would not have got through the day if she had to wear some nonsense that constricted her. So stays were designed to allow freedom of movement while also adding structure to the body. Female people who didn't wear stays mostly either were young or were sex workers, so pretty much all other women wore stays every day. Based on my age, I have opted not to wear stays as Mary. Someone my age absolutely could have worn stays, and some did, but some also did not. It depended on the individual. The other thing is that stays are pretty difficult to make if you haven't done it before, and I didn't feel up to the task. Every woman wore at least one petticoat. Depending on the lifestyle of the person in question, these had different purposes. They could be for modesty, volume of skirt, warmth, or any combination of the above. Mary's is mostly for warmth and also simply because it was the done thing. Mary's petticoat is made from the same undyed linen as her shift and has 2 drawstrings at the waists. Most peasants' clothes would not have been fitted at all, but would close with pins, drawstrings, lacings and the like, meaning that they were far easier to make and could also be easily passed from person to person. The next item is pockets. These were essentially very small bags on a bit of string, as it was far easier to make one set of pockets which could be worn with anything than to sew individual pockets onto every outfit. They were often very nicely embroidered, even on working women, and were usually quite large. I doubled up the cloth for durability. Next, Mary wears a simple shirt of white cotton. This closes with a drawstring. The sleeves may look massive at the moment, but they will look less absurd once the jacket is added. Small disclaimer, I don't know if this is how these were made in the era. It's very difficult to find information, especially from the time, about what peasants wore, and it's made more difficult by the fact that all we can see of this shirt in the show is the ends of its sleeves. But based on my limited research and on my knowledge of how other items were made, this seems a reasonably sensible guess. Next, Mary wears a yellow jacket. I don't really know where a peasant got yellow or blue cloth, but I'm just rolling with it. The jacket closes at the neck and cuffs with strings to tie. Quick note, the word jacket in the sense of a woman's item up until the late 18th century is not the same thing as what we today would call a jacket. It simply refers to a sturdy garment worn on the top half of the body, usually as an outer layer. It took me ages to put the jacket on when we were filming this, so here's some more background information. Mary burnt as a witch, although her very evident fear of the devil suggests she was anything but, and lived during the Stuart era, which lasted from the early 17th century to the early 18th, spanning the reigns of King James, King Charles, Queen Mary, King James, and Queen Anne of England. It's pretty likely that Mary died during the reign of the first James, 6th of Scotland, as he was particularly paranoid about witches, meaning that witch trials were quite common during his time on the throne, and he even had Mr. Shakespeare write a play about them. Hubble, bubble, toil and trouble. I have made Mary's outfit accurate to the show when one looks at the finished product, but also accurate to the time period based on my research. I would like to say in advance that despite my hyperfixation and my research, I'm by no means a fashion historian, and I also could find very little on what peasants wore in these times. My costume is therefore a balance of show accurate and historically accurate. The overskirt is linen and fastens in the same way as the petticoat. It simply adds another layer to disguise the shape of the body, because God forbid somebody should realise that girls have legs. The skirt also has gaps in the sides to allow access to the pockets, which I think is quite cool. This is a good time to note that most working class women's skirts actually wouldn't be as long relative to leg length as these are. Mary's as long as she's 16 here, and a skirt that was the right length when she was 16 would be far too short by the time she was grown up. Much easier to live with a long skirt for a bit than to add cloth as you get older. The reason that working women had short skirts compared to tough skirts is because they were just that, working. It would be difficult to work if your skirt was long enough to drag and pick up all the water from any stream you cross, and freedom of movement is worth considering too. Next is what, for lack of a better word, I'm calling a waistcoat. This laces down the front and is made of blue cotton in double layers for strength. This item actually took quite a while to make, as I had to sew the layers onto each other and then do all the seams for the individual pieces. Not to mention the fact that Mary's waistcoat has several more seams than it needs. It could be in fewer bits of cloth. I also used white thread because that was what was on the machine, which was probably not the best idea. This strip of white cloth is known as a fichu, which is probably a French word. Je parle français. J'ai appris l'école de français en école. The fichu was sometimes to preserve modesty, as a lot of bodices could have very low cut necklines. For the upper classes, whose fichus would be made of lace or silk, this would be the only real purpose, but for a working woman, it could also protect the back of the neck from sunburn, in which case the cheaper, less translucent cloth would also work better. Mary's cap is a white cotton rectangle with a drawstring at the back. I leave this drawstring tied all the time as the cap just sits atop my head. This again was a societal norm. This is a good moment to note that my hair isn't accurate for Stuart women, it's too short. Most women would have had hair a lot longer than mine and would have tucked it up and then put a cap over it. The women who let their hair flow loose down the backs were mostly sex workers, which again caused most other people to avoid leaving their hair loose. It was a matter of dignity. Mary wears an apron. This is the only item which are made with proper pleats. This is largely because I hate pinning pleats, although I do love the result. I think these are called box pleats. The apron helps to keep the skirt free from dirt and can also be used to hold things like apples or potatoes. Oh, and here's a clip of my aunt's dog saying hi to me on the first take of this.